Luke is the managing director of the Washington, D.C.-based security consulting firm, Security Management International. He's the author of 7 books on security. Luke has been a consultant to the U.S. Department of State, the U.S. Department of Defense, Fortune 500 companies, as well as foreign governments. I'm feeling pretty safe tonight in this room. Really safe. He's traveled to over 130 countries, and he's trained thousands of students on the topics of counterterrorism, counterintelligence, and strategic leadership. Prior to establishing SMI, he was a security consultant for Raytheon. Luke also previously served on the U.S. Department of State's Foreign Emergency Support Team, where he was the representative from the CIA's Office of Special Activities. In this capacity, he was responsible for immediately responding to terrorist attacks carried out against U.S. targets overseas, and subsequently serving in Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, and other global hotspots. So, can you now just imagine what you're going to hear tonight and how special this is going to be? He likes to say that over the past 25 years, he's been mugged, he's been drugged, detained, blackmailed, and shot at. So now let's continue to enjoy your dinner while enjoying this engaging session of espionage and security secrets.
Welcome everybody this evening. Thank you for coming out. My name is Luke, and I'm a former spy. That's not something that I'm used to saying. It's actually quite strange to be saying that publicly, especially I spent so many years pretending to be somebody else. But no, it's great to be here. I think this is a fantastic topic. You are really in for a lot of information tonight related to all sorts of topics for technology and for espionage, and most importantly, to how to think like a spy. But when we talk about spy, and I'm a wanderer, so hopefully this mic here is on too, we don't even actually use the word spy in the intelligence community. In fact, the proper words are intelligence officer, operations officer, case officer, or what I was in my career, I was a technical operations officer. But anyway, as mentioned, I have worked in over 130 countries during my travels: Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Colombia, Brazil, Ukraine. And I have the distinction also of saying that I have not been in just one, but 2 African coups d'etats on the African continent. So people ask, well, how do you get through these things and get home safely to your family? And the answer is learning how to think like a spy. And specifically, I'm going to talk about a methodology tonight that is used by the CIA for training, which is called the CARVER methodology. Hopefully this is staying on. Great. Now, you might think that when somebody who works at the CIA comes and gives a speech, that it starts off with something crazy like, so there I was. And then it's followed by something absurd like up to my knees in hand grenade pins, or even better, you hear the stories, there I was at the Baccarat table in Monte Carlo across from an international arms dealer. Well, I will tell you that nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, there's a joke at CIA that says you go in thinking you're going to be James Bond, and you actually find yourself more like Miss Moneypenny. And what that means is you spend so much time in a cubicle typing at your desk, at least 2,500 to 5,000 words a day. So there's sort of a reason that when people leave the intelligence community, they become authors and write books. I have 7. So it's something that we do. So I always like to start my presentations because we're talking about what? We're talking about information, whether that's digital information, cyber, everything like that. Now, for those of you old enough to remember the movie Wall Street with Michael Douglas, everybody remembers, Gordon Gekko, his famous quote was, what? Greed is good. Well, when you work in the intelligence community, or if you work in the cyber community, you realize that this is the most powerful quote from that movie. The most valuable commodity I know of is information. And if you think about that here in the United States, we're not a manufacturing nation anymore. Our key export in this country is our intellectual property. It's our currency in this country. And that's why it's so important and why there's so much emphasis placed on it by other hostile foreign nations and business competitors to steal that intellectual property. And if we're talking from a cyber perspective, I think Bill Gates said it best when he says intellectual property has the shelf life of bananas. When you're in the tech world, your goal is to remain just 6 months ahead of your competition when it comes to your intellectual property. So anybody here ever heard of the Aspen Institute? Or yeah, a few people, right, Aspen Strategy Group. Every year, the Aspen Institute, they put on an event in Aspen in the summertime. It's sort of like Davos is in the Switzerland, right? All the big names come in. They do it more for national security related. So in 2018, they had the big names there, Condoleezza Rice. They had Madeleine Albright. They had Robert Gates, Secretary of Defense. They had all the tech leaders, ambassadors, senators, you name it. They all came together in Aspen for 3 days. And the topic of their discussion that day was, in 2018, the rise of the machines. Now, the person who kicked off that conference was the Secretary of Navy, Richard Danzig. And Danzig started the audience off, all these big name, big brain people in the room, he started them off with a question. And I'll pose the same to you here. He said, let's pretend that we take the Great Lakes and we take the Great Lake here, Lake Michigan. We're going to take Lake Michigan and we're going to drain it. We're going to take all the water out of it, 22,000 square miles, 923 feet deep in the middle, over 1 quadrillion gallons of water. We're going to dry out Lake Michigan, take up my visual aid here, and we're going to take 1 shot of water. We're going to put a shot of water and we're going to pour that right there at the bottom of Lake Michigan, and then the 923-foot dry spot. And every year, we are going to double that amount of water. So in year 1, 1 ounce, year 2, 2 ounces, years 3, 4 ounce, et cetera, et cetera. So the question was, if we start in the year 1940, how many years before we can refill Lake Michigan? Anybody want to yell out a guess, venture a guess? How many? 50, I heard? Yeah? Anybody else with a guess? All right, well, let's walk through it. Let's see. So in 1940, you've got the 1 ounce. So 10 years later, in 1950, you're going to have 1 gallon of water. Not much of a difference. Another 10 years, you're going to have 150 gallons. 1970, we're up to about 16,000 gallons, or about as much water as you can put in your swimming pool. But still, in 30 years, we really haven't made that much of a dent. But let's keep going. Let's jump ahead another 30 years to the year 2000. Now we have a sort of a light sheen on the bottom of the dirt there. 2010, we've got a few inches of water. And in 2020, we've got 40 feet. Now here's where it gets interesting. Just 5 years later, we've refilled Lake Michigan. 5 years after that, we've refilled all of the Great Lakes. This is the power of exponential growth. And this is what is happening in the technology world right now. Now, they use 1940 as an example. Really, it's about late 1940s, right after World War II, is when the microprocessor came out. So you all probably hear out there every 12 months, the processing power of a microchip doubles. It's actually about every 18 months. But I want you to consider this for artificial intelligence. Right now, the boom that we are seeing in AI, and we're probably only 30 years in, really, to AI. So what is coming in our lifetime, in our future, and the distant road is going to be, I don't know if you want to call it scary or if you want to call it remarkable, but it is going to be very, very, very interesting to watch. The point is, you cannot be behind. Whether you don't like technology, whether you're new to it, maybe it scares you, you can't. You have to embrace it in some way or the other. Just as a side note, I put up on the board there the chessboard. This story that Danzig tells is actually an analogy that's been around for a while. You may have heard it from the rice analogy. There was an old fable that a sage went into India and presented the emperor of India with a chessboard, with a game of chess. And the emperor was so impressed, he said to the sage, "Wow, I will give you anything that you want for introducing this wonderful game to us." So the sage says to him, I'll tell you what, I'll take 1 grain of rice on the first square. On the second square, I'll have 2 grains of rice. Third square, 4, and then we'll just continue to double it. So the emperor says to him, "Wow, what a humble man, what a simple request." Well, again, if you think of the power of exponential growth, by the time you get to the 20th square, you're at 1 million grains of rice. By the time you get to the 40th square, you're at 1 billion grains of rice. And by the time you cover all 64 squares on a chessboard, you've got more rice than it's ever been grown in the history of the world. That's where we're going with technology. So today, what I'm going to be talking to you about is how to think like a spy. And what that essentially means is stop thinking linear. That's what it means. And there's a great little quote I've got up here. Sometimes we live in the in-between times. So right now, like we said, the in-between times are those years where you're really not seeing that compounding effect, but we're seeing it with the microprocessors, and we're early on to the AI, but the jumps are coming pretty fast. So we're going to try to get out of linear thinking. How do you do that? Well, I'll start with a quote. Some of you may have seen this before. I think it's great. I think it's very relevant here. Miyamoto Musashi, great old Japanese swordsman, author of The Five Rings, would say, "It's better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war." Again, what that means is, whether you like technology or not, you have to be prepared for it. And as the old saying goes, it's better to need and not have than to have, or to have and not need than to need and not have. So, how do you think like a spy? What is thinking like a spy? How do you get out of this linear mindset? Well, in the intelligence world, officers can find themselves either as the first line or even the last line of security issues. You have to be able to remain calm during a lot of instances, and you realize that panic disrupts decision making. I had a boss who would tell us in Afghanistan, we were at a forward operating base, and he would say, "If not us, who? If not us, there's no cavalry coming. We're it. All the taxpayers who are home sleeping in their beds in America are expecting us to do something. We're it, guys. Every decision we make, every action we take, it's on us." And I remember going out at 3 o'clock in the morning in Afghanistan to go meet a warlord, to pay him money in exchange for information or services. And I'd have to go armed, and I'd have a security detail with me. And you just couldn't panic. If you showed panic in front of somebody like this, somebody with no remorse for taking lives, you were in trouble. So you had to be able to stay calm. So how do you stay calm? Just as any of us have to stay calm. First and foremost, just breathe. just calm yourself down and breathe. But then you have to learn to become an active listener. In the intelligence game, there's a saying, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. You should always be listening twice as much more than you should be speaking. You need to recognize what's going on around you. That means situational awareness. How many people, when you came in this room today, counted the exits? Knew if there was a fire, or if there was an active shooter came through the door, where you would go out? We don't have to worry about this too much here in the United States, thank God, knock on wood. But a lot of the countries that you go in overseas, these are the first things that you think about when you walk into a room or you choose a table to sit at. Okay? Your ability to prioritize information, communicate information, and most importantly, executing, following through. Okay? So I talked about this thing, CARVER. So CARVER is this methodology that came out, that started with the OSS during World War II, kind of picked up steam in the 1970s when the modern age of terrorism sort of kicked off. But it's basically a way that you assess the world looking at things through these 6 criteria. Number 1 being criticality. How critical is this situation? Number 2, accessibility. How accessible is the information that I want to get out of somebody? Next is recoverability. If everything goes south, can I recover from this? How am I able to recover? And again, this applies to anything. This can apply to an operation. This can apply to business. There's a joke that you can apply this if you want to online date with somebody. You can use the CARVER criteria to find a profile on online dating. The CARVER methodology was rumored to be used in the raid of Osama bin Laden. So it's a very effective tool. Criticality, accessibility, recoverability, vulnerability. What is the overall vulnerability of this thing that I'm targeting? And then effect. What is the effect of doing so? Physically, psychologically, politically, all of these things. And then recognizability. How recognizable is it that this is actually a threat, or how recognizable is it an opportunity? And we do this 2 ways. We look at it offensively through what we call a target analysis. So think about this from your business perspective. Offensively, as a target analysis, this is almost like a SWOT analysis. You want to say, all right, looking at the market, looking at my competitors, how can I carve out my competitors? You do that offensively. Then you turn your hat around and you do it defensively. You look at yourself for your own vulnerabilities. You become very honest with yourself. As Socrates says, know thyself. Well, if you want to know yourself, CARVER yourself. So you're looking at it both offensively and defensively. Now, again, we're talking about get out of this habit of linear thinking. We all hear the term, and we all hear this. It probably irritates you as much as it irritates me. You have somebody say, oh, we got to think outside the box on this one, right? Everybody's thinking outside the box. That's like the hot buzz term that's been around for decades. Does anybody know where this phrase comes from? It actually goes back to the big consulting firms. McKinsey, Bain, Boston Consulting Group, when they'd go get the Harvard MBA kids to come and interview for a job, they'd say to the kids, all right, here's your test. You're going to connect the dots using only 4 lines, and you can't take your pencil off the paper. Try to connect all the dots with 4 lines and not remove the pencil. Well, you do that, and you find that you always have at least 1 dot always remaining. However, the smart kids, the ones who probably ended up getting the jobs, realize that you can go outside the lines and you can hit all the dots pretty easily. So this is where outside the box thinking, that's what we got to have on our team, those kind of people. Well, in the intelligence community, they tell you, we don't want these kind of people. We want people who just say, there is no box. Forget about the box altogether. Because in the intelligence world, you deal with fragmented piece of information all the time. That's all you deal with is incomplete pictures. So you have to remove that box and get out of this linear mindset. So what we were always taught is, if you've heard of Richard Feynman was a PhD. He worked on the Manhattan Project with Einstein and Oppenheimer. Pretty regular guy for kind of a physicist. He was kind of like a Carl Sagan, regular guy. I think he had TV shows and stuff back in the day too. But Feynman would say, when he was 12 years old, his dad would sit him around the dinner table, and he'd say to him, let's pretend Martians. Let's play the Martian game. Let's say that Martians came down to Earth, and they didn't know anything about Earth. They didn't know anything about, what's a table, what's a speaker, what's a podium. They have no concept of any of this. How would they see the world? How would you explain things to them? How do you look at things from their perspective? And that's a big piece of this, looking at situations through other people's perspective. So let me give you a little quiz again, try to make this interactive. So this is an actual test, quiz. This has gotten out on the internet. I'm sure they're not happy about this at CIA, but this was an original test for analysts done by the Office of Strategic Services back in the old days. And this is, the OSS was the precursor of the agency, And they had the bomber, the B-24 Liberator, real workhorse in World War II for the Allies. And if you look up here, all the yellow dots represent places where the bomber flew. So they have a question for the analysts. They say, all right, we've got this workhorse bomber now. Let's say that we take all of the bullet holes, the frag that the planes take, all the hits and everything, and we're going to composite it from all the planes, and we're going to put it on one aircraft. And then we're going to study that one picture of that one aircraft. So if you look at it, the red dots represent the summation of the damage seen on the individual B-24s flying missions in World War II. So they'd say to the analysts, all right, well, what do we conclude from this, right? Here's another view, a top and a bottom. So if you're an analyst, you're brought into CIA and they're like, hey, this is our workhorse bomber. What can we do to improve the capabilities of this aircraft? What recommendations as an analyst? What do you analyze from this? I'm sorry? Armor the top. Yeah, armor the top. What else could you do? Fly higher, maybe? Maybe the plane's flying too low, it's getting shot from the top. Fly faster, put some stronger engines on it. Maybe have it fly with fighter escorts. These are all very common recommendations that the first-time analyst would say, and they'd all be wrong. What they would do is say, all right, take a breath. Let's ask the same question again, but in different ways. How many ways can we ask the same question differently? And what they came up with, of the planes that returned from combat, the red dots represent the summation of damage seen on the individual B-24s flying missions in World War II. What can we now conclude from this? Well, what we conclude is, hey, the guys who got all shot up on top, they made it home. It's the planes that had the nice clean underbellies that came back that makes you wonder, well, maybe instead of reinforcing the top, we need to reinforce the bottom of the aircraft, because if they take a hit in the belly, they're going down in the ocean because they didn't make it back to base. So again, different way of asking the same question, getting a different answer. I'm sure a lot of people in this room are managers or supervisors, or you have subordinates, and a lot of times you have to go and you have to ask them questions of why things are the way they are. Anybody familiar with Toyota's 5 Why philosophy? Great philosophy. Maybe your employees may not like it, but it certainly cuts through things and gets to the heart of the matter. So Toyota has a process that if you as a manager have to ask one of your subordinates a question, you ask them the question, why, at least 5 times. Now I know that may seem a little obnoxious if you're an employee, but let's see how this works. So let's say at the Toyota plant here, the assembly line breaks down. The supervisor walks on the floor and he says to the foreman, he says, hey, why did the assembly line break? And the foreman says, well, it blew a belt. That's question number 1. Well, why did it blow a belt? Well, it blew a belt because the belt was worn. Question 3, well, why was the belt worn? Well, it was worn because it wasn't changed out earlier. Well, why wasn't it changed out earlier? Well, because the quality assurance team only performs checks once per month. Well, why did the quality assurance team only perform checks once per month? Because they're short-staffed by 2 people and couldn't get to it. So what is originally assumed to be a problem with the belt or the vendor or the machinery is actually an HR staffing problem. So again, it's kind of like your kids. Your kids, why, Daddy? Why? They just keep going, why? I know, again, as an employee, it can be a little obnoxious, but as a manager, it really cuts through things. So let's get on to technology here. That's what you all want to hear about, and I'm going to give you some of the threats and the warnings out there so you can be smarter travelers. I know that we've all given you a copy of my Counter-Espionage for Business Traveler book out there. It's no surprise, none of you should be surprised by this, that China is the #1 offender of stealing intellectual property, particularly of the United States. 1 out of every 4 active FBI investigation right now is an economic espionage case of the Chinese trying to steal intellectual property from the U.S., from a U.S. business. So how do we deal with this? Well, a lot of you are saying, well, I don't travel to China. I have no intention of going to, Beijing or even Taipei or Hong Kong for that matter. I go to London. I go to Paris. I don't deal with that. That's where my business or my pleasure takes you. Well, China, much like other countries, engage in a strategy in which it is much, much cheaper. Why spend billions of dollars in R&D when you can spend millions in R&D just to steal it, right? That's sort of the philosophy. That's the strategy out there. People are like, oh yeah, strategy. I know it when I see it. But really, strategy is just a framework for your decision making. And even though strategy goes way back to Sun Tzu and all of the great leaders, in fact, the word strategy comes from the Greek word stratego, which means army leader. But we really haven't started studying it formally. It's really only been studied for a little over 100 years now. So actually, the first person who was really seen as the scholar on strategy was a guy, Henry Jomini. He was Napoleon's top general during the Napoleonic Wars, and he documented Napoleon's strategy. And Jomini would tell you that to be a good strategist is all about logistics. You want to win a war? You want to win a business contract? You want to be the tops in your field? Be good in processes and logistics. And everybody's like, yeah, sure, that makes sense. Good, have good, every business people, good process, good logistics, all of that. But then, probably about 50 to 60 years later, you had the Austrian general Karl von Clausewitz come around. And Clausewitz, for those of you who are maybe military people, in the military academies, or even in the best MBA programs, they make you read On War by Karl von Clausewitz. And Clausewitz came out and said, no, your whole thing on strategy is wrong. The reality is, especially if you're talking about war, or even if you're talking about business, is that there is a fog of war. War is messy. Nothing is clean. Nothing is like you write out in your little planning books. In fact, you could say that 3/4 of any war or any battle there's a fog of war. You have no idea what's going to happen. So Clausewitz was the one who came out with this phrase, this idea known as, and if there's French speakers in the room, you can laugh now. I'm going to butcher this. I've done this many times. The word coup d'oeil. Any French speakers? Totally butchered that, I'm sure. But coup d'oeil in French means a stroke of genius. And what that is, the best way that I can interpret it for everyone here is, you think of there's always a guy like a Tom Brady. The game is on the line, 2 minutes left, they're behind. There's always that one person, or maybe there's that person at your company, or maybe it's you that is able to always at the last minute snatch victory from the jaws of defeat. That's what Clausewitz says the reality of war and strategy actually is. And again, in the intelligence world, that's what we buy into, because there is no perfect information. There is no perfect handbook with how to do everything. So just kind of staying on the strategy train just for a second, then I'm going to change gears. I'll give you a few examples. Does anybody know Coca-Cola is the most famous product in the world, the most recognized logo in all of the world? Does anybody know what Coca-Cola's strategy is? Now, I'm not talking about their mission statement or their goals and objectives or, quarterly anything, but what is their actual strategy? It's actually pretty cool. So Coca-Cola's strategy, the underlying framework for which every single decision that Coca-Cola makes is this: you should be able to walk in anywhere on planet Earth, any country, regardless of language. You could be in a village somewhere in the middle of a jungle, a mud hut, and simply say the word Coke, and the other person knows exactly what you want. That is a strategy. Jack Welch, GE, he was voted the greatest CEO of the last 100 years, more than Steve Jobs or anybody else. He had a very famous controversial strategy, for those who remember. He said if GE wasn't number 1 or number 2 in a particular product line, it was cut. So he got the name Chainsaw Jack for getting rid of a lot of folks. I had the opportunity to play for Nick Saban before he was at Alabama at Michigan State. You've probably heard of the process, Nick Saban's philosophy. His strategy is beat the guy across the line from you for 5 seconds, every play. But just think of it as one individual play. You got 5 seconds to beat that man in front of you. And that's the whole strategy of Nick Saban winning all the championships he does. 5 seconds to beat the other guy. Elon Musk is in the news again for all kinds of reasons. SpaceX. Anybody know what SpaceX? This is a cool one. I really like this one. What's SpaceX's strategy? It's to make human beings, Earthlings, an interplanetary species. I thought that was pretty cool. And now, anybody know who this fella is? Right here, and this brings us back to where I'm going. Deng Xiaoping. So, anybody ever wonder, how in the world was it that in the 60s, 70s, 80s, China was kind of a third world country, and now China's suddenly a superpower? Well, China can thank communist leader Deng Xiaoping. So Deng Xiaoping, in 1986, put out a program called the 863 program. It was actually in March of 86, so just 863 backwards. He put out the 863 program. And the 863 program stated, the way that China will advance and catch up with all the other developed countries in the world is it will go out and it will steal everything it possibly can. And that has been their philosophy ever since. And I think it's safe to say that they've done pretty well with it. Now, strategy, like China is doing, requires deception. It's not as easy as you think sometimes to steal. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. But I'm going to make a confession to this room. Only two people know this, my wife and my sister. I am a magic geek. When it comes to magic tricks and stuff, I mean, I'm a nerd when it comes to magic. Always loved it. How many people, we'll show some age in the room now, how many people remember the magic moment on Siesta Key? Okay? If you remember that, if you were back here back in the late 70s, early 80s, the magic moment, it was a restaurant on the Key. You'd walk in and it looked like Harry Potter land, right? It had all the architecture of all this cool jungle theme, and there'd be a Merlin the magician statue, and you'd press Merlin's crystal ball and the walls would open. And you'd walk into this cool restaurant, and they had all the pictures of, all the famous magicians on the wall, and then at the end, a magician would do magic tricks for you, all this stuff. And then, as a kid walking out, they had a gift shop. So my poor parents must have bought me every trick in that shop. And it got to the point that my parents were like, we're not going there to eat anymore. We're just going to go to the gift shop, get you a gift, and then, go someplace else. So imagine my joyful surprise when about 15 or so years later, I go to work at CIA headquarters. And come to find out that there is in the CIA library, which is this cool library in the building with all these maps and history books and everything like that, there is what's known as the Barton Whaley Denial and Deception Magic Library. Because there is this great relationship between the world of magic and the world of intelligence for all kinds of reasons. Think about hidden concealments and stuff like that. So I go into the Barton Whaley Library, and there is like books by Houdini, like original first edition manuscripts by Houdini talking about how he did all of his tricks, or the kind of patter or speech that the magician would use to hypnotize somebody, something like that. And the person is named after Barton Whaley. So Barton Whaley was the godfather of deception in America. Hardly anybody knows who this man is, unless you're in the intelligence world. Had a PhD in deception from MIT, worked on the National Security Council for multiple presidents, and any deception campaign that we did in the US, and I won't get into them because they're still classified, this was the guy brains behind it. And I bring it up because Barton Whaley was a master magician as well, and actually wrote the encyclopedia on the last 200 years of magic. So there is this relationship. In fact, one of my first courses I ever took at CIA was called Denial and Deception. And you went into the classroom, and it was taught by a magician. There was a magician in the front of the room, and he would quickly do a magic trick, and then he would immediately show you how it was done. And usually when you find out how a magic trick's done, it's a letdown, but he would show you. But the purpose of him showing you how the magic trick was done was to show you that, hey, what the eyes see and the ears hear, the mind believes. And this is the basis for psychological operations, for misdirection operations, for strategic communications, whatever you want to call it. So that's strategy. Now, obviously, you have to have tactics to go along with strategy. But as Jack Welch would famously say, and think about yourself as a leader here, Jack Welch would say, hey, of the Fortune 500 CEOs, 80% of them are tactical. They say they're strategic, but they're tactical. 18% are strategic, and only 2% are both strategic and tactical. And what do we always see? When there's a crisis, we have hurricanes here and all kinds of stuff in Florida, so we got great examples. Something major happens, and what does the leader do? Oh, I got to roll up my sleeves for a photo op and get tactical with the guys. It's not your job as the top person. Your job is to kind of keep the battleship moving along, not to get photo ops, getting down, delivering things and stuff like that. And that's really what leaders kind of fall into a lot of times, is that trap of the photo op. And when we talk about strategy and leadership, this is one of the best little quadrants. I encourage you, we don't have to do this now, but I would encourage you with your teams, with your own organizations, when you go back. Very simple chart, it's been around for a long time. Along the top, you've got your strategy, or what or why you do. Along the side, you have tactics. And your strategy is either clear or unclear, and your tactics are either effective or ineffective. So if you look at quadrant 1 here, can you name a company that has a clear strategy and clear tactics? What's an obvious one? Apple, exactly, the gold standard for it. You could say maybe Southwest Airlines, some of those kinds of things in there. But what is an organization that has an unclear strategy but pretty good at tactics? I'll give you one. Uber. Uber just recently, after all these years, started turning a profit, a small profit. Uber has completely changed, revolutionized how we do taxi services and ride share and everything, but it doesn't make money. So the strategy is not necessarily there. They get all their money from investors. What about an organization that has a clear strategy but ineffective tactics? Now, as somebody who lived in Washington, D.C. for 20 years and was forced by the government to fly United Airlines, I would put United in this category. United was very good at getting you from point A to point B, and they were very good at making money. In fact, as government, you had to use United flying out of Washington Dulles, so they did very well. But if you were a United follower, and I've got 2 million miles on United, the tactics were very ineffective. I mean, it was miserable back in the old days. Now, United's had a few new CEOs, they're changing things around, but a company that maybe makes money, but it's not a pleasure to do business with them. And then finally, an organization that has clear strategy, an unclear strategy and ineffective tactics. What was that here? The U.S. Congress, the best example of all. Congress, absolutely. You could say the post office, right? The post office has to be subsidized. They're not as good as UPS or FedEx that turns a profit. You could say Amtrak could fall in that category, something like that. So this is just a little fun exercise you could do with your teams. But let's get back into espionage. I was talking about China, talking about the threat there, and again, some people say, oh, well, again, I just go to Europe, or I really don't even travel that much internationally. I'm more of a domestic traveler, and that's fine. You're still at risk. You're still a target. How many people ever use Wi-Fi on the airplane? Come on, we all admit to doing this, right? If you're sitting up in first class in seat 2A using the in-flight Wi-Fi, and you do not have a VPN, the guy in 36G next to the toilet all the way in the back is reading what you're typing on your screen. So be very, very careful with using an in-flight Wi-Fi. To that end, how many people, now this is one people will not admit to. How many people, we'll get to her in a minute. How many people use the free Wi-Fi chargers at airports? Yeah. If you do these internationally, let me let you in on a secret. Internationally, every single one of these is owned by the local intelligence service. So if you, now I'll caveat that by saying, if you are plugging in with your USB port, if you are plugging in with the block that has the outlets going in the wall, you're a little bit safer. Not much, but a little bit. So if you are plugging in at an airport, or how many people do this? You travel and next to your hotel room bed is the alarm clock or the lamp that has the USB plug-in for your, come on now, really? You gotta make it that easy for intelligence people or competitors to steal everything off your phone? It's true, some things are that easy. Now, I got a picture of Air France up there. There was an old room, I mentioned before that France, the DGSE, that was the French version of CIA is DGSE. They have come out, their director has come out twice over the past few years, not few years, but many years ago, and would say, of course we spy on the United States. Are you nuts? You think we as France can have the R&D of Silicon Valley? We steal. And it was back in the 90s that director, I think it was Cohen, of the Pentagon stood up and said, every time, every day in Paris, and there's at least 15 hotel safe break-ins by the intelligence. You don't know that the intel service has been in your safe, but every day, at least 15, and I'm sure that number since the 90s has grown exponentially, but they can go into your hotel room and download all your stuff. They're doing this on purpose. It's very easy. There's cameras in your rooms. I hate to tell you this, it's pretty common. The French are notorious for stealing your intellectual property. There used to be the rumor that the flights on Air France in business class were bugged with audio devices so they could hear conversations. There was also the rumor that one of the flight attendants was not really a flight attendant. She actually worked for DGSE. She would be a honeypot, and she would say to a targeted businessman, oh, well, where are you staying in while you're in Paris? The Ritz-Carlton. Me too. Wow, we should get a drink at the bar. And then you know where that goes. And don't be fooled if we got any hotelers in the audience tonight. These hotels, you say, oh, I only stay at a Marriott. I only stay at a Hilton when I'm overseas. Those are franchises. Those are owned by the local intel services guy's brother owns that. So they can get into your safe and anything. I was in Thailand one time, and the hotel, the safe was locked when I got into the room. So I called down the front desk in Bangkok. I said, hey, my safe is locked. They send up some 15-year-old kid. Kid types in 1, 2, 3, 4 pound. The door swings open. And I'm like, what's that? And he goes, all you tourists are always leaving things in the safe. Every safe has a master combination we can get in. Now you tell me if a 15-year-old kid knows that, what do you think the intel service knows? And you're like, and all you're doing when you put it in a safe is serving it up in a nice, easy place for them. They come in, open the safe, take a picture of it so they know where everything is, take it out, download all your stuff. Literally takes a couple minutes, maybe under a minute, and put it back in. That's it. That's how easy it is. Now, let's talk a little bit about social media here. Now, anybody remember who this lady is here? We're on the 15th anniversary, or actually even more recent, Anna Chapman. Anybody watch the show The Americans? That was a great show. That was an awesome show. It was actually based on her and her colleagues. So the Russians had a espionage operation where they put these people, men and women, into the United States just to blend in the Washington, D.C. area, just as regular people, get regular jobs, speak perfect English, no accent, just like the TV show The Americans. And Anna Chapman, who was really a trained Russian spy, almost got into the White House. She got very, very close. The FBI was onto her, arrested her, and then we recently traded her and some of her other spies back to Russia in an exchange. Anybody here familiar with the Robin Sage experiment? So for those of you who might be Army people, Robin Sage is the name of the final exercise that the Green Berets in the Army do for their exercise. It's in Robbins, North Carolina. The recruits, they fly over, they parachute into Robbins. It's this fake country, they call it Pine Land, and it was started by this Colonel Sage. So the exercise for the last so many decades has been called Robin Sage. So, a white hacker is someone who is an ethical hacker, kind of an oxymoron there. He decides he's going to try a little experiment. And what he does is, he takes this picture of this young lady who is an aspiring porn star, takes this porn actress's picture, puts it up on LinkedIn, gives her the name Robin Sage, says that she has a master's degree in strategic intelligence from Johns Hopkins University, says she has a security clearance and is currently working at some defense contract or something like that. And the aim of it is to see how many people will connect with this young lady. Now, as you can imagine, the results were pretty staggering. A lot of guys out there said, oh, well, look at this young lady who wants to connect with me. Sure, I'll connect with you, young lady, and start a conversation. So, fast forward 9 months later, there's the annual White Hackers Convention in Las Vegas, and the real Robin Sage waddles out, big heavy-set guy on stage with beard. He looks like comic book guy from The Simpsons, and he says, hi, I'm Robin Sage, and let me show you all the people who connected with me. And he proceeds to put up, I kid you not, members of the staff of the Joint Chiefs of the Pentagon, members of the National Security Council at the White House. I will say, because I was working at this time at the agency, nobody from CIA and nobody from FBI fell for this. But every single day, guys and girls, this is a genuine threat to you. People reaching out for you for advice, mentorship, whatever you want to call it. It's a scam in most cases. So you really want to be careful of this. The whole honeypot traps, that's a whole other lecture I could give you on that. All right, I'm going to stop for a second and do a pop quiz just to make this a little bit more interactive. See how we're doing on time here. Got a couple more minutes. So here's your question. You are an intelligence operative, and you are operating in a hostile war zone-like country. Let's call this, maybe it's a country like Syria, let's say. And your job is you have to meet with somebody from the local government, or there really isn't a government, but a local who's got some intelligence that he's going to pass to you. Now, he wants to meet you at this cafe, or you've decided on this little cafe here. Now, if he's seen with you, there could be some questions being asked. So you kind of want to be smart of where you're going to sit with him. You also want to make sure you're sitting in a location that protects you and you can still kind of see what's going on. So if you have your choice of any table in that restaurant, where do you think you'd sit? A5? A2? C2, sorry, C2. C1. B1. All kinds of different guesses here. Okay, so for the sake of time, and so here's the thing in the intelligence community. There is no ever exact answer to any question. The answer to every question is, it depends. That's what you have to get used to. My preference would be table A2 in this seat right here for me and the seat for the other person here. Reason being, if you've got a gang, shooters come through the door, you've got a way to get out here, out the back door. People say, well, why don't you take A1? Well, if this is a window, I should have mentioned that was a window. There's a car bomb outside. The person at A1 takes the shrapnel of the glass and gives you a little bit of a shield if the car bomb goes off. So this is the kind of thinking that you're in when you're operating overseas. And again, you get out of this linear mindset. Last topic I'm going to talk about here is something that it does pertain to technology. In technology, we would call it maybe social engineering. And this is where somebody calls you, and maybe you've had this. This happens a lot. Oh, I'm calling from Microsoft. Your password is out of date, or your software is out of date. I need your password, right? We've gotten those calls. Or you're at work, and it's this, hey, this is Bob in IT, which there is no Bob in IT. It's 90 days. You need to change your password. I'll do it for you over the phone with you. Something like that, right? So that's social engineering. In the intelligence world, we call it elicitation. And elicitation is that subtle conversation that you have with somebody in which they ask you questions, open-ended questions, and start to extract information from you, but you don't realize that they're actually doing this to you. And I will tell you, maybe second only to Canadians, Americans are the most naive and dumbest travelers in the world. We are that dumb. We are that naive. We think the taxi driver is our friend, and we will be pen pals with them, and all of these types of things. It's not the case. Other countries laugh at us for our naivete. I'm a Michigander, I will admit it. I have this reciprocity. If one comes up to me and says, oh, well, here, let me show you a picture of my kids. Oh, well, here, let me show you mine. People play this against us in other countries, for sure. Anybody ever see the movie Spy Game with Robert Redford and Brad Pitt? It goes back to the year 2000. Awesome movie, kind of far-fetched, but there's a great training montage scene in it. And Robert Redford is training Brad Pitt to be a spy. And he says, hey, you see that building over there? Do you know anybody who lives in there? And Brad Pitt says, no. And he goes, all right. Robert Redford says, in 10 minutes, I want to see you standing on one of those balconies. Meaning that I want you to talk your way into a complete stranger's apartment and go stand on the balcony. And this is an actual test that the Israelis do. The Mossad, Victor Ostrovsky, put this out in his book, in the Mossad training. An agency does it a little bit more for fun, more than anything. But you have to have the ability to talk to people, elicit information, and to persuade them. Do we have any smokers in the room? Nobody will admit to that. I bet you there are. Well, I'm going to find out. Now, I'm not a smoker. I I don't even know how to smoke, to be honest. I can smoke a cigar, but I have no idea how to smoke a cigarette. So I had a job where I had to go down to Africa. And if anyone's been to Africa, Africa's my favorite place, always. I've been to almost every country in Africa, but always one of my favorite places to go. And I remember I was up in Frankfurt, and I had to go through the duty-free, and I was going down to this one particular country in Africa. Now, the thing about Africa is there's always in the capital city a hotel, like a Hilton, a Sheraton, something like that, and that is ground zero for the whole community. That is the place where you are seen and be seen kind of place, right? So I was up in Frankfurt at the airport, and I'm like, oh, well, I'm gonna get a pack of cigarettes. Because in the spy game, Robert Redford tells Brad Pitt, he goes, technology gets better every single day. But the reality is, all you really need is a stick of gum, a pack of cigarettes, and a smile, most of the time, to get the information you're looking for. So I bought a pack of cigarettes, and I bought Dunhill cigarettes and a Dunhill lighter. The reason I bought Dunhill, again, I know nothing about smoking, is in the old Ian Fleming James Bond books, James Bond smoked Dunhills. That's why I bought it. I thought it was cool. It was a cool looking lighter. So I went down to Africa for my assignment, and I placed at the bar there, I would go at night into the bar, and they were like stand-up tables, and I placed the pack of cigarettes and the lighter just at the edge of the table so people could see it, and then I'd read a book, something like that. And sure enough, people would just come to me. Hey, can I have a cigarette? Hey, can I use your lighter? And the thing about smokers, they're, especially here in the United States, my gosh, because they're a dying breed. Smokers talk, boy. It doesn't matter. You can have a guy who's the vice president of something here and a guy who's, like the janitor. But if they both smoke, they'll go find a place out in the back by the loading dock, and they will gossip like teenage girls. It is amazing. I had that same pack of cigarettes and lighter for probably a year because I never smoked them. I literally just used it as a prop to get people to come to me and talk to me. So sometimes it's the simplest things. So what are these people doing when they talk to you? What do spies do when they have a conversation with you? This will get good. When they talk to you with elicitation, they're using a technique known as NOAM. And this is a sales thing for those of you guys who are in sales. Maybe you know this. You are assessing during that conversation the person's needs, their wants, their wounds, the access that they have to something, whether it's money or a person, and then do they have money themselves to actually spend, or do they need money? So, for example, if I was meeting with somebody who I thought had access, who had a lot of information from the conversation, I would want to find out, what's his need? What does he need? Does he have a sick child that needs surgery? Does he have a payment that needs to get made on his house, or they're going to take it away? That's a need. Or was it a want? Was it, he wants a nice watch? Or he wants a nice pair of shoes or something like that, whatever it is. And you need to determine what these things are. And that's what's happening. And a lot of times airplanes are the best places to do this too. Anybody used to fly Virgin or KLM or Delta. About 10 years ago, all three of those airlines, it was Richard Branson at Virgin who started this. You could book your ticket on Virgin, and then if you volunteered for it, you could put your LinkedIn profile and your Facebook profile on there. And then other passengers could see you, read your profile, and say, oh, I think I'd like to sit next to Luke. He sounds interesting. So think of this from a spy's perspective. You're a big-time business person, or you're a salesperson, an attorney, something like that. People are reading your LinkedIn profile. Oh, I'm going to sit next to that guy for 6 hours, plow him with a bunch of old fashions, and then I'm going to get this guy to talk. So it's a real thing. Now, for those of us of an older generation, they would say people would spy or give up secrets for the acronym MICE: money, ideology, coercion, or ego. But we see that now there's a whole new young generation of techies and everybody else coming in, and they don't necessarily subscribe all the time to the same type of philosophy of MICE. So they might go with what we call rascals. This is Robert Cialdini says this: reciprocity, authority, social proof, commitment, liking, and scarcity. So we're talking to young people and you want to persuade them. Those are the hot buttons that you're looking for. How do you do it? Like I said, you start with a smile. There's an acronym, Scream Pigs. You start with a smile. Smile works in all 195 countries, I assure you. But the next thing you do is you start with a compliment. Hey, I like your shoes. Hey, I like your watch. Something like that, just something to break the ice. But you don't want to look like a nut right? Especially if it's a man talking to a woman. So you have to do what's called the referral. And you say, oh, I see you're here for the Suncoast Connect conference. Me too. So now I've referred it. So now, hey, I'm not a nut job or anything like that. There's some kind of common bond between us, whatever that may be. Then you exhibit, you say who you are, you ask about them, you try to remain a mystery. Remember, you let them talk twice as much as you. You poll them for information. You want to see their political leanings, things like that, because you can obviously, playing off political heartstrings is one of the easiest things to do. Marketers do it all the time. The Russians do it all the time. Everybody does it all the time. You gather information, and then they give you a gift. Now, a gift could be anything as simple as giving you their card, buying you a drink, giving you a pen. And then the last thing is they schedule. Now, schedule means that they have got your contact information, you've got them, or you've scheduled a follow-on meeting. There's a lot of times that I've been out somewhere and I've gone back to my hotel room in the middle of the night and said, oh my God, or I've just woken up in bed. Did that person elicit me today in the airport? And then I go through the thing. Well, they didn't give me a gift and they don't have my contact information. I don't have theirs. I didn't give my last name or my real name or anything like that. I think I'm okay, right? But that's kind of the mindset that you get into with this. And there's a whole bunch of tricks of the trade. You let the person be the star. There's the halo effect. If anybody's familiar with the halo effect, this is that you play off this. If somebody went to an Ivy League school, I know there's a few in the room here, but you'll know, because if somebody went to Harvard and they're a complete stranger, they will find a way to somehow slip into a conversation that they went to Harvard. And once you find that on a person, you're like, oh, I know how to work this person over, right? So the halo effect. You quote something as a fact, or you let them disagree with you. So you could say something. You always want to give the person the impression that they have the upper hand. So you could say something to the effect of, hey, it's 9/11, man. That was God, I remember that Wednesday was such a tough day. And the person corrects you, no, you mean it was Tuesday. Tuesday, you're right. You let the person correct you automatically, and that gives them the psychological feeling that they now have the upper hand. They're smarter than you, even though you went to Harvard. Right? Use flattery very sparingly. It's not as used as you would think. And then obviously sharing things like confidences or, all right, I'm going to let you in on a secret here, and then the person, you see if they reciprocate in kind. Okay? So in closing here, I know that I'm rambling and I know that we have other things to do here and I don't want to keep up too much time, but I talked about the CARVER methodology. So CARVER, again, it's an offensive target analysis, assessing the situation, but then also using it to assess yourself defensively and your own vulnerabilities. And the best way to sum this up is, I have to use the obligatory Sun Tzu slide up here. If you've read The Art of War, or everybody should have read The Art of War in this room, or at least know what it is, no matter for business, for parenting, whatever, it's phenomenal. This is one of my favorite quotes in there. And it's, if you know the enemy and know yourself, you've done CARVER offensively and defensively, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. If you know yourself, meaning you've done your own self-assessment, but you do not know your enemy, you have not done a target analysis of your enemy, for every victory that you gain, you will suffer defeat. And then finally, if you know neither the enemy and you don't know yourself, you're going to lose every time. And I was told I could do a shameless plug, so I will do that now in a very subtle CIA persuasion way. If you enjoy learning more about the CARVER target analysis and vulnerability assessment methodology, our next course is in Vegas next month. So the funny thing is, if you remember, there was a GSA scandal a few years back. The government prevented any government courses from being held in Las Vegas. That will probably go back into effect here pretty soon. No contractors or government employees could be out there. But we said, screw it, we're going to do a course for civilian population, for business people. So if anybody wants to go to Vegas next month and bring your team, whether you're strategic planners or you are security people or any just leadership in general, we'd love to have you out there. Join us at Park Hyatt, only smoke-free hotel and casino in Vegas. Okay. And with that, I will conclude, and I'll just leave you with my parting words here. It is a very, very dangerous world out there. I can attest to that. You do have to know yourself. You have to know the situation you're in at any given time. But most importantly, just stay safe and vigilant out there. Thank you.